I'd like to introduce Leah, who is our executive sponsor, and Spencer Anderson, who's going to be our facilitator. So welcome. And I don't know, maybe we'll just take a minute and go around and introduce ourselves, because I don't think everybody knows everybody yet. So I'll go first. Sharon Smith, Commissioner on the OTC.
Do you want me to go?
Sure. Just whoever jumps in, go ahead.
Sitting here. I'm Paula Hammond. I currently work at WSP nationally up in Seattle. I was the former Secretary of Washington DOT and had a 34-year career at Washington DOT, but was an intern for Oregon DOT for 2 years during college.
I'm Ted Odlin. I'm a consultant today, but a heavy highway contractor for 40 plus years. I won't tell you the truth because it'll make me sound old, but been in the industry all my life, built a lot of bridges and projects in the Oregon, Washington area. So that's me.
Maybe Spencer and Leah, do you want to just say a quick hello?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I feel like I'm in an echo chamber.
You're a little echoey, but we can hear you.
Yeah. I'm Leah Horner. I'm the Assistant Director for Operations at ODOT. I want to say, lurking on these meetings, I think for a couple of months. I've been out, but I'm really excited to be here and to be participating, especially in this particular meeting. So thank you all, and I will hand it over to Spencer.
All right, thank you, Leah. Hi, everyone. My name is Spencer. I apologize. I'm having kind of an odd technical issue with my video. But yes, I'll be the facilitator going forward for CIAC. I'm in a new role as the Strategic Planning Initiatives Manager here in ODOT, working out of the Director's Office. Before this, I was the Field Office Manager for the Bend DMV Field Office. So I was out of there for a while, but it's a pleasure to meet everyone, and I'm excited to be in my first CIAC meeting.
Great. I think now I'll just turn it over to PK, who's going to lead us off on our first topic today.
All right. Thank you, Chair Smith, committee members, and my fellow ODOTians. It's good to see your faces again. A lot of the CIC members, I think you might remember seeing me once or twice before, but nonetheless, it is good to see you. So here I am today. I have the pleasure of talking to you about our legislative key performance measures. As you recall, we're required to report these annually. And part of our charge on HB 2017 was to report them to the OTC, as well as any key performance measure changes. But the focus for today, just to stay on task, is to talk about our current key performance measure report based on performance from last year. So we have a slide deck in front of us, and so we can kind of go through that. And as we go through it, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. I would ask that if you have any questions, please feel free to jump right out there and ask, and we can kind of handle it as we go. Just so you're aware, this will be a consent, unless I hear otherwise, this will be a consent calendar item for the OTC. So this is a little bit like making donuts. This is something we do every year. The last year, it was reviewed offline, in fact, because of the nature of the business. But anyway, nonetheless, here we are today to talk about this, and I'm here to answer any questions. I had a charge last time, or actually a couple years ago. I've been doing this about 10 years now. First of all, Phil Case, performance manager, to get that out there. Sorry about that. To have an executive summary of those areas where we're off target and declining in performance, because we have 13 key performance measures. So it's important that we kind of, take the time that we do have and talk about those areas where we really need to do the work. So the executive summary, which was in part of the meeting materials, is something that kind of highlights exactly what we're doing. But we also have the PowerPoint presentation that we can review real quick. And again, I would ask if you have any questions, concerns, comments, additions, or you just hate it, let me know. And we have an opportunity to get that fixed before we send it on off to the OTC. And of course, if you have any specific questions I don't have the answers to, I will be happy to do some homework and get that back to you as soon as I possibly can. So I'm not sure who's running the slides today. I think Spencer might be, or no? Okay. Anyway, so yeah, let's just go through the slide deck really quick and just tell me what you think. Obviously, here's our title slide. This is I'd mentioned it briefly. This is our charge under HB 2017 to develop those key performance measures and then to report on them. So today we're going to talk about the second one, which is reporting. Slide. This is the pizza slice, or I should say the pizza pie of all the different performance measures. Many of you have seen this before. Again, it kind of graphically displays the different types of performance measures we have in the agency and how there's a little bit of overlap, but the bottom line is a strategic action plan is that kind of northern star that kind of guides us. We're developing right now, and you're going to hear about this a little later today, or sort of strategic action plan metrics and the development of those. But in addition to those, of course, we have our programmatic measures, our legislative key performance measures, which we're talking about today, and then our federal performance measures. Slide. Just so you know where we are in the world on the timeline, here's where we are. It's past June. Our most recent long legislative session has ended, and we had a couple of key performance measures changes that were approved. But nonetheless, our annual performance progress report is due October 1st. And so that's why we're talking about this today, so we can get this submitted in time for the OTC to review it and get it submitted on up to the Legislative Fiscal Office and DAS. And then the wheels on the bus go round and round again, and we start all over. So next slide, please. Just for a broad brush picture of our key performance measures, we started with 28 when I got here 10 years ago. When you have 28 key performance measures, you truly have no key performance measures, right? So what we did is many of you are aware, we dialed these down a little bit to our current 13. And the ones that are highlighted are the changes that we had during that legislative session. And as you can see, under our current approved key performance measures, we had a bike ped facilities index added to replace our bikeways and walkways. And then for our DMV service index, which we'll talk about that a little bit later if we have time, replaces our DMV field office wait times. Slide. Now, here we are, our currently approved key performance measures. Just going to list them real quick. Our safety, traffic fatalities, and serious injury rate. That one, the reporting of that is always a little bit delayed because it's a complicated.
Hey, PK.
Yes.
You probably can't see while presenting, but Paula had her hand up. I don't know anyone.
Oh no, I can't see that. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I was wondering if I should just.
Yeah, please jump in. I can't see that.
Can you go back one slide? I'm just curious why I was looking at the policies or the priorities on the left: safety, mobility, preservation, sustainability. And so as we move ahead to this year and next, there's no more sustainability, which seems weird. So who decides that some of these come and go over time?
That is basically as we go through and develop what it is we think is important to as kind of the guiding agency's priorities. 10 years ago, that's where it was. Sustainability is a pretty broad term. And we've kind of morphed that more into not so much as, hey, this is greenhouse gas measure, we're going to measure fish passage or whatever, bike lanes and sidewalks. Actually, we've determined, or we've kind of, as our thinking has grown, that, hey, you know what, our bike lanes and sidewalks or pedestrian and bicycle facilities are more of a mobility issue. And so, you know, we've kind of redefined what these terms mean. And so that's why that sustainability isn't really there anymore. It's more, we've really rethought about how we measure things and what they really mean. And ultimately, it's more an outcome of, hey, you know, we want to provide an ability for people to have different ways to get around besides driving. And so bike lanes and sidewalks, which is now pedestrian and bicycle facilities as an index, is more of a mobility.
Yeah, I can see how they could touch different topics, but where I guess where my brain was going, and I don't see even in the past there was any connection to under sustainability. I also think about resilience, and resilience is such an important topic now particularly in our neck of the woods for seismic, but for every other piece of our infrastructure, resilient sustainability, it feels like there's nothing in the KPM list that touches on, are we building sustainable and resilient projects?
Yeah,
And
I think that's a good-
I don't have a good measure to throw out, but I'm curious about that.
I could say that currently, as you say, this is something that as transportation agencies across the country and really across the world, we're looking at this, that the resiliency piece, right? You know, whether it's earthquakes or floods or landslides or all those different things. And so there's a lot of talk right now at the federal level about what does that mean? What is resiliency? Is that a measure of, you know, this road washes out every other year because of mudslides, or hey, bridges don't hold together in this particular area because of moving earth? What is the definition of that? And so I know that there's been a lot of discussion at the federal level, and a lot of states through AASHTO and other organizations are talking about, hey, what is this? What does that measure look like? And I am with the performance measures at the AASHTO level and at the federal level, talking with some of my colleagues about coming up with a good measure for resiliency and what does that mean. So I suspect within the next cycle or two, you are going to see a definition, and it may even come out as a federal definition, but nonetheless, we're going to come up with a definition. What does resiliency mean? Is it, hey, we have an area that might be susceptible to tsunamis, like the Oregon coast, for example, or the Pacific Northwest, really on the coast. So do we have redundant locations that have the ability to recover from a massive earthquake and a tsunami? I mean, are all of our repair facilities, all of our district maintenance offices, are they all going to be below sea level? Are they going to be flooded with water? Have they been moved up the hill a little bit? I mean, that could be a definition of how many of those facilities are out of a flood zone. I mean, there's a lot of different ways.
I think there's a lot of them out there already. I mean,
there are.
And maybe I'll get off this soapbox, but it feels like you need to walk before you can run on some of these too, when it comes to resilience. But just having a good status of your understanding of your risks, of impacts to the system based on different kinds of threats that may be out there. I mean, you got to start by assessing and understanding what your risks are. But to not do that, and maybe you're doing it separately, you just don't have it on this list. So
we do. I'm going to get out in front of my skis a little bit on this, but I will say that, you know, obviously, Amanda, you could probably talk about, you know, bridge resiliency and all this stuff all day long, I imagine.
Yeah, I'll just say, I think in terms of the legislative key performance measures, it's not there. We have it certainly show up in other places. It's referenced in the Oregon Transportation Plan. We also have other climate measures in there, including reducing emissions per mile and reducing vehicle miles traveled per capita. So those are a couple of measures we're tracking in that space at kind of the highest level policy. But also share to your specific question, we just completed in December of last year a climate resilience and adaptation roadmap. And so in that, we looked at multi-hazards of wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, landslides, and the list keeps going, unfortunately. And so we assessed vulnerability. We assessed where multiple vulnerabilities overlap. And then we made a statewide map with some priority routes to kind of show where investments need to be focused to address some of these issues proactively and also benefit underserved communities and kind of prioritize some of those areas.
So that's perfect. I guess what PK was saying is that, or maybe you did, Amanda, that this doesn't rise to the level of what the legislature wants to see in a KPM. So maybe that's okay. You're reporting it elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, and I'll defer to PK a little bit more, but I think that's the challenge as we talk about performance, key performance measures, performance indicators, all those different layers, as they live in a lot of places. And the key is, how are we using them to make informed decisions? And I think it's both a legislative ones are a key to how are we performing as an agency, but also I think over time, some of this migration has been to let's try to use them in effective ways too. But I think those questions still exist, and is a good point for this conversation is where and how should those live to really affect decisions.
Mm-hmm.
A really good point. I thank you for pointing that out. There's a lot of work going on behind the scenes, but we're not there yet. That's not to say we won't be relatively soon, but I will take that back to my team and we'll have a lot of conversations about it. And I think you're right, though. Obviously that's a very, very important thing. But we got to make sure that if we're going to throw it in front of the legislature, it's got to be fully vetted, that we know we have the data, we know we can back it up. There's some history here and we're choosing targets properly. So it's important that we do our homework before we take that step. For sure. Okay, there we go. So here's our currently approved key performance measures. You just saw them on the last slide, but this is just kind of highlighting them again. I mentioned that we have a new DMV service index. I can talk about that a little bit at the end, but that was just approved. That will actually be reported this year, even though it's not required to be reported next year, but they can backcast how we did based on all those different service indexes or service measures that make up the index. So we can report that, and that will be. Next slide. And then here's, again, the rest of them, kind of the asset condition and our bridge and pavement and kind of the basic ones. And again, the pedestrian and bicycle facilities index is a new one that was approved recently. And I'll talk about that again a little bit at the end as well. And that will be ready to report for next year's report. So next slide. And here's kind of the meat of the slide deck. How are we doing? And we got 4 that are on target, 9 that are off target. Being on and off target, it matters, but sometimes those are aspirational targets, so you're going to miss, and that's okay as long as you're trending in the right direction. In this case, we have 6 that are steady or improving, but 7 are worsening. So if you say, hey, well, maybe they're above target, but they're worsening a little bit, okay, we need to take a look at that. But really the ones that we're concerned about are the 4 that are off target and trending in the wrong direction. So next slide. And here's, the quad box, which again, I highlighted in yellow. These are the 4 that are especially not where we want to be. The one that's most concerning to me, and I'll talk about this more as we go through this, is the bridge condition. That is a very slow moving key performance measure. And it's really hard to turn the direction of it because these bridges last 75 to 100 years. So when you start falling behind, it is extremely hard and extremely expensive to catch up. So this is the first time that's been below target since 2014. And again, I'll talk more about that one. Again, we have construction projects on time, customer satisfaction, and then fatality and serious injuries, that rate. The reason why there's slightly different color text is because some of them we work with our external partners to achieve these positive outcomes. Some are more internally driven. So whether it's traffic congestion or fatalities or serious injuries or some of these other ones, we can have some amount of control, but for the most part, we're kind of reacting to what's out there and trying to do the best we can because we do, again, work with external partners. Whereas the ones that are, kind of the lighter blue, those are the ones that we have a whole lot of control over, mostly. So next slide. And again, I'm going through this pretty quick, and if you have some comments or concerns, let me know. Okay, so here's, again, the 4 that we're talking about, and here's the definitions of them. So as you go through them, you can see percent of state highway bridges that are not distressed. That's kind of a interesting definition. Without getting into the weeds, distress doesn't mean that it's unsafe. It just means that there's certain limitations to it. Maybe there's a height or weight restriction because of the design of the bridge, or maybe it doesn't meet current design standards or some other things. So there's lots of things that go into what distress may or may not be. Customer satisfaction, that's a key performance measure that all agencies that report key performance measures are required to report. So that's not going anywhere, and we can't really change that. And we wouldn't really want to, because it's important to identify what our customers are experiencing if they're satisfied with it. Construction projects on time. Again, we tweaked this one 2 or 3 sessions ago to make sure that we were doing a better job of measuring what on time was for our construction projects. And when we baseline dates for construction completion. And then, and I think many of you were probably part of that conversation. We went through that the last time. And then the fatalities and serious injury rate. Again, this is a combination of the fatalities and serious injuries per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. So that's how those are all defined. Next slide. These last few slides are the factors of what's going on. And again, so we'll kind of talk in a little bit more detail. And again, the executive summary that I put together as part of the materials goes into a lot more details about what it, not only the factors, but what we're doing about it. So anyway, bridge condition, like I said, we've been unable to maintain the bridge condition, and it has been in a slow decline since 2018. HB 2017 did, and the federal, I forgot the acronym, but the IIJA, the federal funding measure that came out recently, it will slow, it will, it's not going to stop the decline of our condition of our bridges, but it will slow it a little bit. We have a lot of older bridges, and of course, being older, they, like across the country, they depend on more and more maintenance. And of course, that's more inspections to make sure that they're safe and usable and functional. The problem with this measure and why we're looking at currently within the organization, within ODOT, about changing this measure is because we've gotten to that point where we had a very small number of good condition bridges, a very, like in the teens. And this is as determined by national standards in bridge condition. We have single digits, like low single digits in the poor. So that means that essentially 80% of our bridges are in the fair condition. The problem is, as years have gone by, those bridges in their fair condition are just barely above poor. And because we've had limited budgets, and this, again, I expect this conversation will be going to become up more and more, is a significant percentage of our bridges are fair, 80%, but the vast majority of those are just barely above the poor condition. And so therefore, we've done the best we could with the budget we had, fixing little things here, maybe replace a bridge here or there. During the interstate bridge building years, the 50s and 60s, they were building 60, 70, 80, 90, even over 100 bridges one year in the state. Now we're building single digits generally. Sometimes we'll build a little more, but at the end of the day, we've got a large wave of bridges. We're no different than any other state, but a large bridge, wave of bridges that are all going to be sort of extending well beyond their service life. Couple
bow wave based on their age of construction.
Absolutely. So
yeah, we saw that too.
Yes. Based on current funding levels, a bridge built today needs to last 900 years.
And I think one of the problems that we're going to encounter is in the funding side. I think a lot of people think, oh, IIJA, they funded so much, why do you need more money? And I think that's the real challenge. That's the story that we're going to struggle to tell the community, the legislature, the federal government, our federal partners. And I just don't see a whole lot of opportunity out there to change this. I mean, I think that's one of our challenges is there's just not enough money to do it.
That's right, Chair. There are some shocking statistics out there, but at the end of the day, we're reaching that point where the condition of our bridges is going to reach that slow, steady decline. We're not going to maintain anymore based on current funding levels. And you're right, it's a money thing. We're going to have to accept the fact that our bridges are going to be in worse condition. Of course, there's all things that go along with that. When you start weightlifting or weight restricting bridges, those large trucks have to go somewhere else. And usually that means on a less ideal path that takes them through small towns or over longer trips, burning more greenhouse gases, causing additional costs to the transportation companies to get their goods to market. So there's so many. The
reality is you're going to have to prioritize which ones you can do and for what reason, using your resilience, cross-referencing it with your threats and your assessment around resilience can help shore up reasons why certain bridges need to be fixed now. But yeah, that's a challenge quite a few states are having right now around explaining what the IIJA is doing There's some great things happening under that bill, but the money is spread in such a way that it's not the be all end all that it's been purported to be.
And Washington's having the same bridge challenge, I assume.
Yeah.
Do you think
Yeah.
that they're on order of magnitude about the same, or do they have more challenges? do you think?
I've never seen the comparison. There's definitely a chart on WashDOT's website if somebody wanted to dig to look at the bow wave of, bridges needing to come due and age wise, that kind of a thing. So I think it's something we watched for years because we knew it was coming. The 50 years after the interstate was that moment where we realized a lot of our bridges only were lasting about 50 years. I think PKU started to say they need to last 900 years now.
A bridge built today based on current funding levels needs to last
Yeah.
as long as 900 years, which was the Crusades. So that's what we're driving across those bridges.
Certainly, we're getting
For the map.
better, I think, as an industry at lengthening the life of bridges, but this is a real issue, I think, that people need to be able to talk more about in a way that legislators and, people in communities understand.
Absolutely. I will say that looking at a resiliency, and recognizing earthquake issues that we have in the Pacific Northwest that we, certainly didn't design for back in the day, we are focusing a lot of our bridge work on those key critical routes, Highway 97, Interstate 5, and a few others, 84. So we are focusing our bridge improvement. I wouldn't say improvement, but maintenance and, a little bit of earthquake resilience on those bridges. But there's only so much that can be done based on current funding levels. So, my bridge engineers, I love them to death. They're not subject to a whole lot of hyperbole and exaggeration because they're engineers. They put their head down and they just do what needs to be done. I love them to death. But sometimes they need help explaining the critical nature of this, right? And they know it. We know it. It's just, like you said, explaining it to our policymakers, decision makers, and frankly, to the public that we've been living on the back of, 56, well, up to 70 years or so of, bridge building. And when those things start, going bad, we're never going to catch up. So I've spent a lot of time on this one. I didn't mean to, but I'm concerned about this one because we finally crossed that Rubicon, so to speak, and the slow decline has begun. And unless we do a major bridge building, and again, this is policy stuff, if we don't do something about it, we're going to have a really, really hard time maintaining what we do have. So next slide. Sorry about the sad discussion there, but that's the reality of it. Construction projects on time. And I know Ted's got a whole lot of background on this one. But at the end of the day, we have struggled the last 3 years, and there's a trend here now of not finishing on time. There's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Some of them we have the opportunity to rebaseline. Maybe we extended the project, made it bigger, did some different things, added some lane miles that we're going to pay that weren't originally on the contract. So we rebaseline those, so they don't count against us. If we make a conscious decision to change a project, it's not going to count against us. These are the ones that, hey, we just missed it. Maybe there was some errors in the planning or specifications or design or just it's unacceptable traffic impacts and things like that. Or we just didn't manage the schedule quite right. Needless to say, a lot of those projects that began in 2019, 2020, and 2021, we had a whole lot of supply chain issues. I hate to use the excuse supply chain and staffing, but at the end of the day, that affects everything, right? And you go to Home Depot over the last couple of years, and there's a lot of stuff that was out of stock, and there's a lot of materials that were not as good as we needed, and they were not available. So that kind of put us back, and we had some control of that, but mostly we didn't. But at the end of the day, we're going to take the hit on that. Obviously, there was some extreme weather events as well, fires and other things that kind of affected the completion of these projects. I expect, based on talking to my subject matter experts, that we will turn this around next year. If we don't, if 2023 doesn't look a little bit better, then we're going to have to take a serious look at what we're doing. But I think that right now, it's statistically speaking, is still kind of within the margin of error. But if we have another down year next year when I come back to you, then we're going to have some issues. But in the meantime, they're taking active roles in being as proactive as they possibly can and learning from all any and all errors that we made in the last year or two. So, but the biggest impact was the supply chain issues and the weather.
Well, there's another issue, and one is when you let contracts, you schedule them to be let in the spring, and they get delayed and delayed and delayed, and then all of a sudden they come out in the fall, and we lose a whole season of work, and we're trying to start a project in the winter time that should have been started in the spring, and it just does nothing but cost us days. So that always throws projects back, and we see a lot of that going on. Another big thing with the state is getting submittals turned around quickly. So many times we do our submittals, we get them in, and they've got 28 days. Well, they take the full 28 days, and then they ask us another question, which we answer, and then they get another 28 days after we give them the answer. And that costs a tremendous amount of time in scheduling, being able to get work started and going. And if we could get that turned around where we could get submittals back quickly, or a question over the phone asked and answered, so it's not another month out, we'd pick up a tremendous amount of time. And the third thing is ODOT is really not good at all at giving extensions of time. We'll have a warranted extension, we'll submit for it as a contractor, and the state's response is, well, we'll look at it at the end of the job and see if you really need it or not. Well, that puts us in a terrible position because we're under liquidated damages if it doesn't get approved. So we're spending money on overtime trying to make it. But then at the end of the project, if we do need the time, it's gone, it's too late, nobody wants to give it to you, and it always shows up as a late project. So those are some of the things that happen on the contractor side that I think the state could really help with and work with, and we could turn this around pretty easy.
That's some great insight. I think I heard you say this once or twice before, but to hear you say it again, you can never say it enough, right? One thing that, since we're talking about this, is do you suspect or do you suppose from your experience or from what you've heard from your industry insiders, is it just the sheer number of projects that ODOT is doing and that we're trying to do, frankly, kind of a lot or too many? Or is it that maybe some of these projects are kind of being farmed out to be managed and we need to have better oversight of those contracts that are being, subletted, so to speak, to other, project managers, do you think?
Well, I as a contractor, we never think you put out enough work, so we can
Of course. Yeah.
more. So that's kind of there, but a lot of it is in the management of it. And
Okay.
it really needs to be a team put together to build the bridge, and responses and need to be correct or quick when they can be quick, and not just put on somebody's desk and wait the full amount of time. And when you work with certain offices, that's how they work, and jobs go real well. I think if you looked at your different offices, you'll find some of the projects that are always behind schedule come out of certain offices, and it's because how they're managed. So I would suggest you go back and look at that, say, is this a trend in an office, or what's going on here? And even doing some meetings with a contractor after a job and sit down and say, okay, what did we do that we could have done better? What can we change, and get that fresh information? And they'll tell you why the job came in late, what went on. And I think it could give you some real valuable information hands-on at the time that could turn things around and change it and help you.
I do know that some of our project managers do what we used to call a hot wash at the end of a project, but I don't know that they all do it. And so I think, to your point, we need to take a look and see if that is being done. And if not, why not, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always something to learn, because just because something is maybe a small project or a one-off, that doesn't mean it wouldn't apply to a bunch of other projects, right?
Right.
Okay. Thank you for that.
I've had projects that we finished the work everything was done, and 3 years later, they'd call and say, well, we need more paperwork. They hadn't really closed the job out even in that time, and it's paperwork issues, filing, they couldn't find what we'd turned in. So some of it is just good management in the field offices that would help.
I will take that as a homework assignment and see what people have to say about that. Thank you for that as well.
Okay.
I'm getting all kinds of good stuff today, and I appreciate that. And that's why I love talking to everybody, because there's always some good feedback here. And thank you for that.
Yeah, I think it would be really helpful if you could look at those suggestions and like take a look at, is there a distinction among our offices? Is there a distinction between in-house project management or contracted out project management? That could help us hone in on where are those levers that we can improve. And I specifically, I mean, the thought of waiting the mandatory 28 days before you even respond, that smacks to me as poor management. And either that, or we don't have enough project management staff processing things. So to get at the reasons why, I think you need to dive a little deeper into where is this happening.
Absolutely. What I can do is I'll take this back to our subject matter experts, see what they have to say. And if it seems like it's something that might be worth your time, I can talk to Spencer or Leah and see if we can get some time on your calendar at some point in the future to talk more about this if you're interested.
That sounds good.
I know you got a packed calendar, but maybe it's just something we can work on.
And anytime I can help, if you need just me to come down and talk with them and we could do that.
Thank you for that offer. Absolutely. I have no doubt there would be a lot of good stuff out of that. Just to keep us on, I know, I'm sorry, I'm hogging a bunch of time today, so we'll keep moving to the next slide, please. Customer satisfaction. Here's another one. I talked a little bit about this. We've always reported this. It's a biennial report. We do surveys. This is a combination of our DMV field office surveys, our CCD or Commerce and Compliance Division with our motor carrier folks. And then it also has to do with our Ask ODOT, which is basically our call-in and online services that we respond directly to, customers out across the world from anywhere. They reach out to us to have questions on everything from, hey, I've got, a stop sign that's covered with brush to there's a construction crew on the side of the road that's blocking it, or with their parking after hours, or, hey, I need to get to the coast, but I've got my mother has a respiratory issue, so I need to figure out the lowest elevation I can go to get to the coast or whatever. So they handle all that kinds of stuff. So those are the three primary sources of this information, and we put it together, and that's how we come up with the sources that we do. But at the end of the day, again, you can see we're kind of leaving the margin of error when it comes to statistically speaking. And so we're outside 5% below our target, which doesn't sound like much, but when you've been 90-ish for many, many, many years, you really got to take a hard look at what's going on. And so the things that we're finding is some of the factors is, like a lot of the country, we're suffering a little bit from social issues near our facilities and roadways. And a lot of homeowners and just the traveling public have a lot of concern about some of the camping and graffiti along the roads. Understandably so, we all have a problem with that, whether it's our roadway or not, or our facility or not. Essentially, people blame ODOT for these things, and so obviously that's a challenge these days. And so that's kind of we're finding that there's a lot of factors, people calling in and writing in about that, ever more than have, especially in the last 3 or 4 years. Construction projects is always on there. Region 1, there's a lot of things going on, actually, in a few places around the state, but most of the challenges or calls are from Region 1. Not surprisingly, it's the most populous area, but that's always up there. Our service levels related to staffing shortages, we cut back and we're trying to hire back, but at the end of the day, when we started opening up the offices and doing all the services that we did, everyone came roaring back, right? Just like everything. And so we struggled to make sure we caught up with the demand because there was such pent-up demand. And so, because again, this is an every other year survey, that's reflected in that. We're doing a much better job managing the flow and staffing that we were when this comes out. So I expect that particular factor will will be mitigated as we look over time in our staffing levels and how we're managing that. And I think frankly, we're doing a much better job in that area. And then technology, and this is just the nature of the beast. There's a lot of new resources to help customers. People kind of get used to the way their online services work from ODOT, and we change it up a little bit, and people come to rely on these things. And if we make a couple changes, they get frustrated with that. And I understand that anytime you get a new change to software like a Word or Excel, I pull my hair out because that little button isn't where it was anymore. So we all hate that. So I understand the technology frustration of that. And sometimes people ask us questions that we simply don't have an answer off the top of our head to. And it takes time to research that information because we can't simply Google it. And today people want an answer right now. And that's just expectation. And so we have to do our best to answer their questions and concerns as quickly as possible. And of course, we need to give them the best possible answers. And sometimes the answer is, we don't have the answer to that question, but we'll get back to you. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we want. So we got to do our best job we can managing, responding to the public and some of their concerns about the responsiveness. Eventually they'll get an answer, but sometimes it takes a little longer than they want. So those are kind of some of the highest factors. And again, the executive summary talks about all the different things that we are doing about these factors. And we can talk about that later if you have any questions or whatever, but we'll keep moving here on the slide deck. So next slide, please. And then down a fatality and serious injury rate. Again, this is a little bit dated, and I talked a little bit about that, and that, the data comes in, it needs to be massaged and looked at, and there's a lot of quality control that needs to go into this, because for fatalities, especially when it comes to those investigations, there are upwards of 350 to 400 boxes that need to get checked on every single crash where they occur. Before that all gets put in the system, it all has to be validated. We have to sometimes wait for drug reports to come back, or maybe, and that takes time. Whether someone's distracted driving, there needs to be some legal remedy for that, to crack into someone's phone to find out if they're distracted driving. So what the cause is, some of these things, it does take time to find out about that. And I will say though that our folks in our crash unit, and Amanda can talk about this a little bit too, but they're making leaps and bounds with the technology to improve the timeliness of this reporting. So I don't want to talk about that too much, except to say that we expect that the timeliness of a lot of this reporting for the causes of these fatalities and serious injuries should be coming in a lot sooner. But to the factors, again, we have a lot of poly substance that's, more than maybe drugs and alcohol or multiple drugs. Sometimes that means some prescribed drugs. Maybe they got a new prescribed medication and their old one didn't interact necessarily with maybe a beer or two, and now it really does. And so it's not just illegal substances, although there's not much illegal these days. But anyway, so poly substances is impairment. Generally, people make bad decisions. They sometimes have a choice not to, or a choice to speed, drive a little recklessly, and not wear their seatbelt. So those three items are kind of what drives up a lot of these fatalities and serious injuries. Unfortunately, we've had a reduction in traffic enforcement activities and emergency response times. There's a lot of reasons for that, but that's working with our partners to do some of these, but you don't find a whole lot of stops anymore, as many as used to, although that is over time, it's starting to increase a little bit as emergency response times are getting a little bit better, and our traffic enforcement is getting a little bit better. We're getting better at that. I talked a little bit about the common three causes, but those are all behavioral. And so we got to do a lot of outreach, education, and enforcement to help improve that. But the trend we see is a national trend, unfortunately. We're just doing the best we can. And one fatality or serious injury is too many, but that's kind of where we're at right now. So slide.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
With all the news out there today, with people stealing out of stores and doing all the crazy things they're doing, and we're constantly told that, well, they're not going to prosecute them if it's under $1,000. I guess my thing is, we've kind of approved law breaking in so many ways. And as I drive down the highways and I see people on phones and open containers, and I'm wondering if society hasn't kind of created some of this by the approval of some crimes, just don't worry about it anymore.
To your point, there's a marked decrease in traffic enforcement activities. And that means speeding, busted taillights. So unless somebody's doing something that's extremely dangerous or really obvious, it's unlikely that they're going to be stopped at the moment because they're speeding, or because, unless again, it's, stupidly fast, they're probably not going to get pulled over. And so there's more opportunity for people to continue to make bad choices for longer periods of time, which is going to lead to bad outcomes.
Yeah.
Are you tracking work zone fatalities?
We are. I don't have that
separately?
in front of me, but I can find out and get it back to you. But yeah, we absolutely, that's one of our highlighted things that we're required to report to the feds. And I know our safety action plan, safety action plan and our highway safety improvement plan, take those into account. And because work zone safety is a big deal. And those, if you're going to find an area of the roadway that is traffic laws are more enforced, it certainly is work zones. Absolutely. And now that school's coming back into session, again, the school zones as well.
Yeah, I was just going to comment that it's, some of the answers of driving these numbers down, there's probably 100 tactics that have to happen to truly start driving them down. But there's a trend across the country to have legislators legalize work zone camera speeding enforcement. And Washington just passed it. So we're really anxious to see how it helps in our work zones, because if workers on the road aren't vulnerable, then I don't know who is when people are going by them at 80 miles an hour.
To your point, I know that and again, I'm getting out in front of my skis a little bit on this one, but there are various cities around the state that have authorized and actually received permission, I guess, to use cameras, and those have expanded, but generally those are frequent crash intersections, not in work zones. And so I think that, to your point, that's a really good point. I don't know. I'll have to find out about that.
I know AASHTO's having a safety summit in October in Kansas City. They're having specific focus on driving fatalities and serious injuries down. So it's something that I'm anxious to see what the results of that conference are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and Paula, I'll mention I'm attending that conference. Looking forward to that conversation. And if anyone has interest, we also have a fact sheet that we updated some data from our safety action plan on what are the contributing factors to fatalities and serious injuries, and then what are some of the focus areas. So if anyone's interested in that, I'd be happy to share it.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I'd like to just look at the data.
Well, and it makes me think that trying to think towards topics for future meetings, maybe a report back next year on that safety summit and see if we can brainstorm some ideas to maybe recommend, because it is a serious and growing problem. And if there are some tools that we can either ask the legislature to help us facilitate or do internally, then I think that's something that this committee could be really helpful with.
I'm hoping that this summit will produce best practices, kind of a guidebook. And the other thing I've heard a lot about lately is wrong way driving. So techniques to keep the drunks and impaired drivers from getting onto the freeway and going the wrong way, because that's plagued us, in the Northwest for a long time.
To your point, one of the largest, most successful ways to manage crashes and serious injuries is through engineering improvements. But we know, whether it's building a roundabout at a rural four-way stop, as much as the trucks hate it, it does dramatically cut down on, T-bone crashes and things like that. But they do take time and they do take money. So I think to your point, there's I expect, and I've seen they've done it in the past, there's a lot of, oh, by the way, do this, do that. Think about these different things that are a little bit faster. And you're right, wrong way is on the rise.
Let's do a quick time check. I think we're pushing it, and so maybe unless there's some last minute questions, we should transition. Thanks, PK. Great job.
Absolutely, thank you. So I'll take the feedback you had. I have some action on it. But as far as the materials, if you're happy and satisfied with it, I'll take one more last look and we'll submit it on to the OTC for their review.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Okay, so our next topic. Not sure who's leading this one.
I'll jump in.
There.
I'm
Oh, there
Mary.
she is.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I've got my headphones in. Sometimes it doesn't work in Zoom, so I'll give it a shot, but let me know. Nice to see you all. My name is Mary McGowan, and I'm a statewide transportation planner and also project manager for the Strategic Action Plan update. So it's one of the reasons why I'm here. And actually, I'll let Jake also introduce himself. He's going to be somewhat co-presenting on this.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jake Easter. I'm a strategic initiative analyst in the planning unit, and I've been working with Mary as her project deputy on the Strategic Action Plan development project.
Perfect. Well, we can go ahead and jump in. Thanks, Sabrina. So as far as what the Strategic Action Plan is, or you'll hear me refer to as the SAP, but what it is, it's a collaborative document that's developed by both the Oregon Transportation Commission as well as ODOT leadership and staff describing our agency's priorities. It's set to cover near-term actions, which will take place over the next 3 to 5 years or so. It also identifies measurable outcomes that we can monitor, tracking, be held accountable for. And as far as what it isn't, to give you kind of perspective, it's not long-term policy. It is intended to be a very action-driven and action-oriented plan. And then it's also not a comprehensive list of all the agency programs and activities investments. It's intended to be a very kind of focused, intentional list of what our short-term priorities are over the next 5 years. So it's not going to include all of the work that ODOT does. You can go to the next slide, Sabrina. And so why was the SAP created? So it operationalizes our long-term policies, such as the policies developed in the Oregon Transportation Plan, or the Transportation Safety Action Plan that you were just speaking about. But it operationalizes them into short-term actions. It communicates our priorities with external partners, such as the governor's office, legislatures, as well as the public, to see how the agency is doing business. It also demonstrates how ODOT is progressive and more forward-leaning in terms of how we're addressing climate, resiliency, as well as equity. And then it also increases transparency and accountability. We have documented short-term performance measures in the SAP that helps us monitor and track progress. The original SAP, we do have one that's currently in place that goes through 2021 through 2023. So it's a 3-year SAP, or Strategic Action Plan. So we're in our last year, so we're setting forth to update the next iteration, as well as progress has been made on implementing the current SAP. We've got a lot of key wins, things that we've done, and new issues have emerged as well. So it's time to get the next one updated. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Sabrina. And so we're proposing, so for this next SAP, we're actually going to broaden it to be a 5-year strategic look instead of the 3-year strategic look, in hopes, a couple different factors, in hopes to align it a little bit better with our long-range policy and update cadence, since our policy plans look out a little bit further than just 5 years. They look more out to 20-year time horizons. So expanding that to a 5-year plan, but also we propose to continue the 3 existing priorities that are in the SAP. So the first priority is sufficient, reliable funding. So seeking sufficient, reliable funding to support all the work that we do. And this is a significant issue that we've been facing and will continue to face if we don't address and tackle some of these short-term actions to address that. Equity is another priority. So prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion by identifying and addressing barriers to ensure that all Oregonians benefit from the system, all Oregonians are safe on the system. And then lastly is the modern transportation system. So it's looking at building, maintaining, operating a more modern multimodal system that serves all Oregonians as well. So for this next SAP update, we do propose to continue the 3 strategic priorities. And let's go to the next slide. And as far as what we think will be different for this SAP, so we have bolded the items that'll be new outcome areas. We have 10 outcome areas that we're going to continue to pursue. And just noting that some revisions may occur as we continue to develop the plan, but the general focus and direction will be consistent with what we have laid out here. These outcome areas have been defined by input from the advisory committee that we've convened, as well as input from the outcome leads that are really shepherding the implementation of this work, as well as we've sought input from management teams throughout the agency, as well as feedback from other external advisory groups, as the area commissions on transportation and our modal advisory committees. And then lastly, this was presented to the commission in July. Sorry, this was presented to the commission in July, and so we solicited some feedback as well as at that time. But this has gotten us to where we are now with the outcome areas. So as I mentioned, we have 10 outcome areas, and as far as what's new from the last SAP, so really focusing on safety. I'm glad PK just went over that performance metric for reducing fatal and serious injuries. That's going to be a key effort within this SAP. Providing excellent customer service, which was also something that PK just alluded to. So that's a new focus of the SAP. The next one is preserving our transportation assets, or more or less managing the state of the system and state of good repair. We've proposed that as an additional outcome area. And I think all three of those three key categories, safety, customer service, and managing the system, were things that we had heard as far as feedback from the last SAP that folks in the agency didn't see themselves represented in the SAP. Now this is a great opportunity to start tying them in. Another key outcome area that was flagged is how we use data. How we use data to inform our programs and policies, how we use data to inform our decision making. That's a key aspect that bleeds across all of the outcome areas. Data will inform all of that work. And lastly, another key outcome area that was added is implementing decision-making processes to improve equitable outcomes. So this is how we make decisions, making sure we have the right people at the right table, making sure we're actually listening to the feedback that's heard, and so creating a whole process and approach to ensure that. So those are the new outcome areas. And then some of the non-bolded ones are existing SAP outcome areas. There might be some massaging of the wording, such as the funding one is slightly phrased a little bit different. But those are going to be continuation of work that was in the current SAP. And you can go to the next slide, Sabrina. And this is actually where I'll hand it over to Jake. He's been closely working with PK, as well as our advisory committee and outcome leads, to begin work on framing up the metrics, because we do have at least one metric associated with each of our outcome areas that I just walked through. But go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mary. So as Mary mentioned, we do have for each one of those outcome areas that she just showed, we have at least one metric. Some have two. And so didn't want to necessarily share all the metrics that we're working on today, because we are still working through that process. But we did want to share a couple of examples to show you the direction that we're trying to head in as we define and improve the quality of our metrics. So we have been working with our outcome leads as well as data owners. And yes, PK has been participating in those conversations. And we went to those groups with a couple of recommendations. And those recommendations came from feedback that we heard from our lessons learned exercise that we did for our current strategic action plan. So the first recommendation was to, where we can, where it's appropriate and where it makes sense, to utilize metrics that we already have in place, or at least good data sources with already established good data collection processes. And then the second recommendation was to improve the overall quality of the metrics in the strategic action plan by making sure that we have very specific targets and/or completion dates in the metric definitions. And so these two metrics are a good example of sort of where we're headed. So safety is a new outcome area. It makes sense to utilize our KPM for reducing traffic fatalities and serious injury rates for that outcome area. And then the second metric, increasing electric vehicle charging infrastructure statewide. While I admit we've got some X's as placeholders there for our targets and completion dates, it's a good example of how our metrics will be worded, and we'll include that specific information. As we move into our conversations about defining our implementing actions, it's at that point that we'll be able to really understand what's reasonable what's achievable and attainable, and what's also going to push us to reach our goals. So we'll be able to fill that in and get that specific information added. One more thing I want to say about the process, and something we've heard from lessons learned as well, is that we need to be very clear in defining the terms that we use in our performance metrics. So all of our outcome leads and our data owners have been given a metric definition form where they can capture clearly the definitions of the terms used in the metric, as well as our data sources, the data collection process, and any specific nuances or considerations that we should know about the data that we're utilizing to inform the metrics. And I think, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So at the same time that we are defining our metrics and improving the quality of them, we are also working on improving our dashboard. And so we have been working with our data solutions office and our Power BI professionals to help us to create a dashboard that is, yes, dynamic and interactive, but also easily accessible, easy to navigate, and utilizes visualizations that are much more specific than what you see here, which is a snapshot of our current dashboard, which just very generally tells us whether or not we're on track, we need some improvement, or we need to reset the milestone. The new dashboard will be much more specific, and part of that work also is about improving the data collection process related to that. So we will be reporting quarterly. We will also be updating the dashboard quarterly. So in order to do that with all of our data owners, we need to have a process that's really efficient. And so we're working again with our data owners as well as the Power BI folks to land on a process that's as automated as we can make it, and makes it easier on our data owners to provide the information. So that's sort of a general look at least at the direction that we're heading with our metrics and our dashboard. I hope it gives some idea of where we're trying to land on improving the quality of not just the metrics, but the process that we use to define them. So I will hand that back to Mary now.
Great, thanks, Jake. And we can go to the next slide, Sabrina. So here's an overview of our schedule. So this effort did start, we launched it about late spring of this year, and we're seeking to have the SAP fully done and then submitted to the commission at their January 2024 meeting. So we'll have it done roughly about 6 months. The immediate next steps include finalizing metrics, as Jake was just alluding to, and we'll do that jointly by defining and implementing actions. So the discrete actions that we're proposing to set forward to put this plan into action. We're starting to work on those now. Actually, we have meetings set up with the outcome leads to start framing those up. And so that'll take place over the next couple months or so. And we will start actually drafting the SAP this fall and looking to have a partner review most likely in November to solicit feedback and direction on our draft. This project was scoped with the intent of leveraging all the work we've done with the OTP update, for example, and that whole planning process. But still with this in mind, we still scoped in other several opportunities to solicit input, engage internal staff directly to help shape our strategic vision. So we did form an advisory committee that I had alluded to. We will meet with them several times over the iteration of the 6 to 7 months. We've also done targeted internal engagement. We've engaged our leadership group as well as particular business lines throughout the agency, as well as pretty intensive coordination with the outcome leads. And then we'll also do some broad staff engagement. We have an all staff town hall scheduled for the end of this month as well. And then we've also scoped some external engagement, which is also one of the reasons we've come to you guys, is we're looking at leveraging our statewide advisory committees. So CIAC, our area commissions on transportation as well. We're also looking at doing targeted partner engagement with our tribal governments, as well as metropolitan planning organizations and public transit agencies. And then lastly, I mentioned we'll be doing a review in November where we'll solicit input from all of those partners as well on the complete draft. But lots of work left before the end of the year to get something pulled together. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Sabrina. So just wanted to open it up for questions and discussion. If you guys had thoughts on any of the previous slides, open it up for general reactions or feedback on the priorities and outcome areas, or as well as the performance metrics and approaches. But I'll open it up to everyone else to provide comment.
Can you go back to the slide that shows the priorities of the outcome areas? Were they all on? Yeah, there we go.
Next one.
Yeah, and then the next one. No,
Oh,
There you go.
there you go.
okay.
Yeah, I'm very happy with the kind of the new outcome areas for safety and customer service and preservation of assets. I think those are three that are top of mind for I think the OTC, as well as we hear from the community, you know, safety and serious injuries, they just seem to be increasing. And, you know, to Ted's point, we aren't seeing a lot of enforcement, and so it's challenging for us to move the lever on that, because a lot of things are outside our control. But if we can, you know, highlight it and reach out to some of our partners and enforcement and the legislature, see what other tools we can employ, I think that's a really good outcome area. So that's just a couple of my thoughts.
Great, thanks.
I think it looks good. The only thing, when you say you're going to reduce congestion in the Portland region, I wince, because you're not in control of how many people are going to drive on the highways. And I wonder how, you know, it seems like when we all moved away from the level of service, kind of A through Z approach, and moved more towards reliable trips, where, yeah, it may take 15 minutes longer than it did back in 1980, but at least that we have a reliable, something that people can expect. It takes an hour and a half to get from Portland to Eugene or something. I feel like this is something you're never going to be able to say, yeah, we did this after 5 years. That's the only thing I worry about.
About the only way I think we're going to be able to make a work on that is through our congestion pricing, if we can implement tolling. I mean, that's really a lever, which, you know, it has been a struggle. You know, the legislature said push out tolling another year, and that, you know, that impairs our ability to make some changes there. But I think that is one tool. But you're right, there's a lot of things we can't do to change that.
Demand management and transportation operations, you know, are the way that people are affecting, you know, or improving reliability. I don't know, that's the only thing that caught my eye, was you might be setting yourself up for failure on that last one.
I appreciate that. We've had lots of discussion about how should the SAP be aspirational or not, and how we position. See a number of these outcome areas, you know, achieving sustainable, resilient, reliable funding. That's always going to be a challenge. Or, you know, preserving transportation assets in light of all of our financial difficulties, or resourcing, you know, just managing the decay or the deterioration of the system will be a challenge too. So we've had lots of those conversations about how do we position ourselves to be aspirational or not, or also just open it up for a conversation. You know, do we really want to set targets though that we know we're going to just hit? We know we're going to be green light across the board. Is that the right message we want to say? Or, so yeah, I appreciate what you're saying as well.
What scares me though, Paula, is if you say, well, we'll never get there, so why try? It'll just continue to get worse. People will give up. Pretty soon we won't be able to drive at all.
Well, sure. And then people will stop driving if they can't move on the freeway. Maybe. Although it hasn't stopped us yet.
Hasn't worked yet, has it?
We haven't hit our pain point.
Well, the only other way to influence that is the cost of transportation continues to rise. We see a decline, so, you know, between congestion pricing on tolling, you know, gas tax increases, you know, various things that disincentivize people or incentivize them to do something else.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
those are tools. They're very painful tools.
They're not very popular.
No. I'm not really sure I understand, you know, very deeply the leveraging data to inform programs and policies. And so maybe, you know, as those get refined, maybe it would be helpful to
A lot of,
understand them.
and I'll try to provide a very brief summary of what I've heard in meeting with the Data Solutions Office folks. So there's a relatively new office that's been stood up within the agency called Data Solutions Office. And it sounds like a bulk of what their work is going to be in the next, you know, immediate term is really getting a better grasp on what data we have available, where that data lives, how we manage the data, how we conduct QA/QC approaches. And so they're just getting their feet under like getting moving in terms of framing up what that office is doing. And Jake, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No,
But a lot of their work in the next few years is just going to be framing up, understanding what data we have, how we can use it, how do we report on it, where do we get it from, all that kind of stuff in the next few years at least.
yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a lot of foundational work that we need to do. It reminds me of in the current SAP, what we have in the equity space, right? The effort that's going out to educate and get people just this foundation so that we're all on the same page. So I think it's kind of taking that same route with the Data Solutions Office, because before we can effectively use data to inform our programs and policies, we have to make sure that our processes are sound, that we have good data, that our data collection processes make sense. And so it's a bigger effort, I think, than it looks just on the surface. It's agency-wide effort that's going to take every bit of the next 5 years in this plan to inventory and do the work they need to do to make sure that they have QA/QC and that sort of thing applied. So it's a big lift. It's a big effort.
Any other comments or questions on this so far?
I jump in real quick.
Go ahead, PK.
One of the things that we talked about, the congestion measure, is you're absolutely right. It's only going to get worse, especially in the short term as construction projects begin to impact, you know, the movement of traffic and buses and everything else that uses roadways, and just all the disruption and all that sort of thing. At the end of the day, what some of these do, to Mary's point, is they are aspirational. We say, look, we're recognizing this as a problem, so we want to, you know, look at it as an outcome area, knowing, yeah, we're not going to meet it. And to your point, Ted, why measure if you're never going to get there? It's an opportunity to bring up and highlight something that is concern, that we recognize as concern, and the impact it has on people's daily lives. And so, yeah, we'll be, at best, we could break even probably and not have or decrease the rise of congestion. But this is an opportunity to highlight the importance of that and the impact on everyone's lives.
I agree with that. I think that's right.
Well, great. I think that's helpful. I don't know that there's anything else. We can maybe transition to sort of a wrap up of today's meeting and looking towards the next meeting, and I'll turn it over to Leah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is my sound better or am I echoing?
A little echoey, but we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I just appreciate the meeting today, and I think, I had a few things as follow-up. And feel free to jump in if I'm missing something, or if there's something that folks would like to add. I think, my takeaways on maybe coming back or doing some additional work on some pieces were around the climate and resiliency component, and looking at where and how other indicators may interact with one another, as well as how it rolls into the actual KPNs that we have that have been approved. I think the other thing that I had on my list was doing some project management follow-up on late construction jobs, and maybe doing some spot checking specifically on how to do better with real examples that could be out there. So we can definitely take a look at that and bring that back. And then the third thing I had was a report back on the safety summit. And then also maybe diving a little bit more into those safety specific components. Those were the three that I had. Did I miss anything?
Oh, that sounds great. Appreciate that. And then for our next meeting, which we're going to skip September, we've got the Oregon Transportation Commission is having a tri-state meeting, so we're going to be pretty consumed with that. We're scheduled then to meet again in October. And this is one where we have tentatively have it as a hybrid meeting or an in-person meeting. And I'm just wondering, you know, Paula and Ted, your interest or desire availability for being in person. We have it in Salem, but you know, we could do it in Portland if that would be easier. Just taking a
We have that
temperature.
date set again. Is it
October 18th.
18? Oh yeah, it's on my calendar. I could come. Yeah, I wouldn't mind coming to wherever. Either one. I mean, Portland's fine, but Salem's okay too.
Okay. How about you,
And
Ted?
I don't know about Ted.
I'm good. I can come to Salem or wherever you want to have it.
Okay, well, why don't we keep it on the books now for in-person / hybrid, and either Salem or Region 1 office. So if we have it at one of the ODOT region offices, then we have the capacity to do hybrid. So let's just leave it as placeholder now. It'll be on the 18th. If things change and we need to switch to a completely virtual, then we'll let everybody know. And yes, and then we are scheduled to have a well, I don't know that we necessarily have a November 15th meeting. I think we'll do internally to see if there's a need for that. And then our last meeting scheduled is December 13th, really kind of to do a recap of the year, and then look at next year's calendar and topics. So between now and then, we'll be coming up with some ideas, and then we'll be looking for input from this committee on next year. And hopefully by then we will have recruited a couple more members, and we'll get back to our full strength. So and that, I don't think I have anything else from the team or the committee that they'd like to cover.
I think we had a good meeting.
Yeah, very good.
Good. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for all your thoughtful comments and putting the work in. And I think we're continuing to do good work. So have a great day, and we'll